Live in Washington today. Tomorrow morning, I'll be reporting inside the Supreme Court as it hears this pretty long shot challenge to try to bar Trump from the presidential ballot in certain states. Now, that effort is a legal long shot because Trump has not been charged or convicted of insurrection. And while the court weighs that issue tomorrow, it will soon decide whether to intervene in the related case about prosecutor Jack Smith putting Trump on trial for trying to overthrow his own 2020 laws. Now, that case is where Jack Smith won big yesterday, a key court ruling that citizen Trump is indeed subject to prosecution and is answerable in court for his conduct. Now, if this were a movie, these rulings and cases right now colliding might almost seem too coordinated, like the second or third act of the film where they're trying to really show you there's a clash between law and a very certain candidate. Because the week has now begun with these judges unanimously ruling a former president can be tried for stealing an election. Days later, though, the highest court in the land will take this challenge to states trying to bar that same candidate for similar conduct. So, what is the distinction here? Well, Trump lost this appeal yesterday because he's not above the law. He is below the DOJ and Jack Smith when it comes to his own conduct and being accountable for it, even if he also, as a matter of his job history, once oversaw the federal government, including the DOJ, as president. So that case is back on track unless the Supreme Court wades in. Well, tomorrow's case is about whether random states and local judges can simply decide and announce that Trump committed insurrection before he even goes on trial. In other words, is it constitutional and fair to ban candidates and basically decide elections that way? Well, I'll tell you right now, most legal experts do not see precedent for Colorado to beat Trump in that case that the Supreme Court will hear tomorrow. But only the Supreme Court will decide that, of course, not some outside analysis. But you should know that unprecedented, it is a long shot. Now, what does that mean as we take this in tonight? Well, here we are. It is a long 9 months before this election day, and yet the Supreme Court is smack in the middle of these big election decisions as the dust settles from yesterday's blow to Trump. Some court experts see that new ruling as the kind that the Supreme Court could simply let stand, especially because Trump's appeal rests on pretty extreme arguments that these judges yesterday cast as a road to a total collapse of our system and the separated powers in the Constitution. And the judges mostly dealt with those kind of sometimes abstract principles in yesterday's ruling. What are the checks on power? What do past cases hold? But right now, I want to turn us, as we start the hour, to one section where they dived into the disturbing evidence of the plots to steal the race by Trump and his aides, minions, and allies. Now, that section is right here of the ruling, and I'm actually not going to read all of this word for word. That's why we've put it up this way, where this is not so you read every paragraph. But we've highlighted a few things here, and I'm going to break it down for you because they discuss the plots about false claims and lies, elector fraud, targeting Mike Pence. And the section goes on with a discussion of Trump's own role directing his supporters who swarmed the Capitol. That's some of what we've highlighted. Now, that's how this new ruling refers to those many plots. Now, some of them, you may recall, were first exposed in detail by the January 6th committee, later outlined in depth by Jack Smith's team. And those very details could haunt Trump. They could actually make it harder for the Supreme Court to want to get involved and effectively delay or table Trump's coup trial. The multi-pronged coup plot is something that we reported on over time on this very program. We documented these potentially illegal plots ranging from green to yellow to red for the first time back in July 2002, looking at the period from November through January 6. Now, later, as you know, the DOJ, through Jack Smith's probe, indicted 5 of these plots, which we've shown you before and which the court just discussed. And Trump's trial has not occurred yet. Of course, that's what the whole clash is about. But the appeals judges made a point of referring to these several plots that we've been telling you about as an assault attempted, and if proven, on the structure of the U.S. government, from trying to steal local votes and demanding state officials overturn results, which you see there, that's been indicted, to pushing the lies, what the judges call knowingly false claims of election fraud. This matters legally because while any single statement by a politician or any even single plot might be minimized or might not reach the level of the bar of proving a crime, the many plots together and the evidence here, now cited by this powerful appeals court, build the case against Trump, including his own damning acts.
In Pennsylvania, there were 205,000 more ballots cast than there were voters.
Over 30,000 illegal aliens voted in Arizona.
They can say that a Biden vote counts as 1.25 and a Trump vote counts as 0.75.
Ballots that were stuck in the machine 8 times, 9 times, 10 times.
Lies. All lies. And not merely PR or some sort of political rhetoric. Those lies, according to the evidence we have, were an operational part of the actions to recruit and deploy specific people to commit elector fraud, which you see there, an indicted act. That was the pretext to get them involved. Some of them may have been confused, but the leaders who knew they were lying knew they were getting these electors, these people, to try to commit elector fraud. Just like those lies were supposed to soften the ground for VP Pence to try to install the same thing, fraudulent electors on January 6th. Pence didn't do it, but that was the plan. And the judges note that would obviously violate constitutionally established procedures. In other words, violate the law and Constitution. So that plot was supposed to be fortified by sham probes at the DOJ. That's the DOJ interference. You remember a very conservative loyalist, Bill Barr, left as he got wind of a lot of what was going on. That's part of the plot. And the failed plot to get the DOJ to interfere at the state level with a lying, possibly criminal effort to launder those state election laws. Now, we know this chain of events now. The ruling basically revisits them as a kind of map that could convict Trump. And I want to tell you, this section of the ruling, which I showed you, the highlighters, and here showed you the arrows, it actually got a lot less attention in the breaking news coverage last night because the ruling is long, and the big headline is, of course, that the trial itself is back on. But this is important because the judges are actually following these plots all the way to the end, showing how those varied plots and lies were supposed to do something quite specific, built enough support, pressure, and a wider context to get Mike Pence to act to overturn the votes on the 6th. And when that failed, the violence came. Trump sat by and watched to see if it would work, and he continued hammering Pence. He's never stood up to defend his own appointee, let alone the Capitol and the nation itself.
Mike Pence is going to have to come through for us, and if he doesn't, that will be a sad day for our country.
It was a very sad day, but not the way Trump meant it. You see Mike Pence fleeing from the supposed supporters of the Trump-Pence ticket who decided and took very concrete actions to try to get him murdered, assassinated, killed. How did they plan to do it? We know the Secret Service, from the calls that were used in the investigation, viewed it very seriously. They thought there would be a conflict. They thought they might have to use weapons. They thought they didn't have the numbers on their side, that they would be overwhelmed, and that basically the sabotaging of January 6th, which you see in the arrow here, might include, in a very credible way, the killing of the vice president. Now, the judges ruled there's a valid foundation to trying Trump for those things, including the sabotage of January 6th. And that day can only be understood legally as part of this longer criminal plot. In the final part of this section that I'm telling you about, which we really didn't get into last night, the judges here, in their unanimous decision saying Trump can be held accountable, write about how it all ended, how the Trump supporters, by the thousands, swarmed the Capitol, causing violence and chaos. Now, this is an important set of evidence here that is different from the more broad conceptual question of, can you try a sitting or former president? And we have the answer to this. Historically, we know the Justice Department has said, no, you cannot try a sitting president. And yes, you can, and indeed, legally, you might be in a situation where you must try a former president. That's what Nixon was worried about and why he accepted the pardon, as I mentioned in our coverage last night. That's a conceptual question. What we're seeing here in this breakdown that I shared with you and that I'm about to discuss with our experts is the physical question, the evidence in the case. These judges didn't need to get into all of that detail. They certainly can rule just on precedent and law and the structure of the government. They mention it for a reason in this ruling that is unanimous, including a Republican appointee, in which the Supreme Court can either leave as is or take to slow down or intervene. I mention it because after all this time and all these questions about delay and process and who's going to be held to account, there are some stubborn facts. Trump did bring those people to the Capitol, and they did storm the Capitol, and they did substantially delay the actual legal certification, and they did try and announce they wanted to kill Republicans and Democrats alike, Pence and Pelosi alike. We lived through all that. Now we live through a time of smoke and steam and lies and fatigue. But that was in this ruling for a reason. So here's where we are. Thanks to an appeal by Donald Trump, the Supreme Court will be hearing this attempted ballot ban case tomorrow. Trump's team says they'll also appeal the big loss yesterday, which puts him back on track to be tried for those election plots, which I mentioned earlier in the program. Trump must formally file that appeal by this Monday, which is widely expected. Then SCOTUS can deny it, which would leave the trial on track, or take it and slow things down. Now, depending on what they do, a certain type of delay could actually end up biasing this whole case. If the justices take their time and guarantee a trial could not occur before November as Politico writes, well, that has huge repercussions. On the one hand, if Biden wins re-election, then the voters made up their mind without the knowledge of what happened in the trial, and the later trial would presumably continue. But if Trump were to win the election under our system, under our rules, the DOJ, under his control, could then dismiss a DOJ case. That means that the Supreme Court, if it acted to do this type of delay, that would function as kind of an assist to a dismissal. That would mean that no trial would ever occur, and the Supreme Court would get away with or have the result of barring the trial without having to say that they did so. Now, the justices are in D.C. They're well aware of the political calendar and all kinds of other intrigue, while the justices also typically insist that they are completely independent from never making laws based on their personal views and political preferences to avoiding the court's politicization.
A judge must be independent and must interpret the law, not make the law.
I do believe that judges must apply the law and not make the law.
The courts should not be politicized.
The question is not, do you like this party or do you like that party? The question is what the law requires.
That the judge's job is to follow the words that are in the law, not replace them with those that aren't.
That's what they say. It's kind of a pastime. But the court did have a pretty obvious partisan tilt in the one big presidential election case that it's resolved, Bush v. Gore in 2000. And some of the people in robes today insisting they would never, ever look at the law, the words in a law through a partisan lens are the same people who did just that in the same exact 2000 case. They were well-placed elite partisan lawyers at the time for Bush. John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, and the very controversial Brett Kavanaugh. Now, this is known. This topic came up in their confirmation hearings. One of the more recent Trump appointees, Barrett, was reportedly dispatched to Florida to help Bush's legal team deal with absentee ballots. Washington Post has written that up, but she claimed she barely remembered it.
I did work on Bush v. Gore. I did work on behalf of the Republican side. To be totally honest, I can't remember exactly what piece of the case it was.
That's interesting. Can't remember that. Now, another controversial conservative stalwart, Brett Kavanaugh, was a partisan lawyer on the Bush team. We checked and found him discussing the same case in 2000, right after the Supreme Court heard the oral arguments. He was dealing with the recount litigation. And I think we have, do we still have that sound to play? Not even then. I want you to, oh yeah, we do. My bad. I was going to show you this. I want you to notice how even then, he knew the game. He was doing everything in his power to be a partisan advocate for Bush, to get a partisan result where the court would do things that made Bush winner and president. But he still knew. You don't admit that. You talk about how, well, the court's just going to deal with the words and the law and not try to think about who it's going to benefit.
I think what we're seeing is more of a divide over how to interpret the Constitution than really political differences. I don't think the justices care that it's Bush versus Gore or if it were Gore versus Bush. What they care about is how to interpret the Constitution. What are the enduring values that are going to stand a generation from now?
Remember, the person you're listening to did the opposite thing in courts and in his litigation advocacy. He's trying to get Bush to win no matter what, and they did prevail. But he's saying, hey, you know, this court, you know, they don't look at that. Now, there's John Roberts, who, to be very clear, has done many things to try to protect the court's independence since he joined. But on the other, you have to remember, he has watched these Republican extremism issues really dog the court in recent years, as well as the ethics scandals that have only occurred thus far on the Republican side. If Democrats have a donor ethics scandal, Democratic appointees on the court will report it and scrutinize it, but it's only been on the right. This election year will be Roberts' largest test yet, as best we can tell. And during his hearing, he argued he shouldn't even discuss his past work or the result in Bush v. Gore.
I do think that the issue about the propriety of the Supreme Court review and matters of disputed electoral contests, it is a matter that could come up again. Obviously,
you notice how even our skilled team of researchers who cut the sound bites couldn't get a clear sound bite out of the guy because he wasn't trying to be clear. He was trying to dodge and weave, and what he was saying there was, well, that issue could come up again, so he didn't have to speak on it. And to be fair, it is true that if there are matters that could come before the court in the future, they're not supposed to say what they would do on that before they rule on it in the confirmation hearings. Having said that, I think it's quite obvious that he, like the other judges, now justices I showed you, are very careful around this, because they don't want everyone to think of them as partisan Republicans in robes, and yet on the big cases, the question is that all they are? Now, Sandra Day O'Connor was known as a pretty pragmatic member of the court, and she once later mused about this controversial decision in Bush v. Gore. Maybe the court should have said, we're not going to take it, goodbye. Or if you're a real political junkie, you might know how John McLaughlin used to say, bye-bye. The point there is maybe the court is better off erring on the side of letting things play out and certainly not interfering. Now, in the Colorado case, they almost certainly have to rule on this, hear it tomorrow and rule, because they have to decide whether everyone's going to be on the ballot or not. But it's the opposite in the Jack Smith case. They can stay out of it, as O'Connor basically said might have been best, and let it play out. And there can be a decision, a verdict before the election, and they can let that play out. So these are tests. And does this court have enough credibility left to do the Republican partisan lever again? To do that on 2 cases in a row, when we might need them even more in November if there's a close outcome? Those are serious questions, and I do not have the answers for you tonight. I can just tell you they are about as serious as a constitutional heart attack.